There's Chuka. Hi, Chuka.
Hey, Christy. Hi, Santosh. How you doing?
Welcome. Thank you for joining.
Good. Ignore my email.
Oh, okay. Hopefully I didn't make you guys worry too
No,
much.
no, not at all. I'm just making sure.
Hey, Marie.
Hello.
Good to see you.
All right, we had 77
Okay.
people register for this evening, so I'm going to assume that people are slowly going to join the room. Santos, let me know when you're ready to begin.
Yeah, I think it's 6:03, maybe another minute, and then we start.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you, everyone, for taking time out and spending this time with us today evening. Appreciate that. Yeah, I think we're getting critical mass here. 22 people. I was looking at the starting slide and realizing it does take a community to do community town halls. We have a lot of people who help us get these events organized.
Yes, it sure does.
Okay, so you can begin, I guess. Thank you.
Oh, you ready for us to start?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Good evening, everyone. I am Christy. Oh, hold on. I want to record this. One moment. Let me go back. Hold on. Oh, did you already start recording?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Santosh. Good evening, everyone. I'm Christy Edwards. I am the program manager for the Community-Based Research Network at Rush. This is our second virtual town hall hosted by C3EN, the Chicago Chronic Condition Equity Network. And we are very excited to be hosting and participating with Phalanx Family Services and District Outreach Initiatives. These are our community partners for this evening. And then we also have a wonderful subject matter expert, Chuka, who Santosh will be introducing later. But I just want to welcome everyone for attending this evening's town hall. We're so excited to have you. I'm really looking forward to tonight's presentation. But Santosh, I will pass it over onto you.
Thank you so much, Christy, and thank you everyone for logging in this evening and spending some time with us. And what we're going to do today is I'll be facilitating the town hall, but we have so much packed in for you. Thank you, Christy, for a welcome. We will be sharing with you the results of our first round of town halls. Then we will have a keynote, which is Prevention of Violence by Dr. Chuka Emezue. He's our researcher from College of Nursing and an expert. So we will listen to his talk today and then follow that up with a small discussion about what are the top 3 things that come to your mind about violence prevention, and what are some of the areas or issues that you want healthcare researchers to dive into once you hear the talk. So we have those exciting breakout sessions coming up later, but without further ado, I will try to jump into the results of the first set of town halls so that you can get to Dr. Chuka's presentation soon. We did 7 community town halls in our first round. As you can see in the right side of the slide, there were in West Garfield Park, in Greater Auburn Grisham area, in far south side, city of Aurora, as well as in Pilsen and West Town. And we were focused on really understanding the chronic health issues across the Chicagoland area. That's why we did it in all these various geographical areas. They had a lot of interactive discussions, and a lot of community members engaged with the topic and drove the discussions. And what we found was that it was really interesting to get to know how the community perceives the chronic conditions, what things come to their mind based on which area of Chicago we are exploring, and then try to find, like, thematically, what are the common things that concern people. So for example, our prompts in the town halls that we did in the first round were what are the health issues that are concerning and are on your mind? How should health issues be prioritized for research and development? And then we broke into smaller groups, as you saw in the pictures here, and we discussed, okay, what does the community prioritize as health issues? How does the community feel about research happening or not happening on certain issues? And we then took all that data and converted that into which area is trying to prioritize which concern. And when we abstract it out, what we heard was there are a lot of these fundamental issues like housing insecurity or systemic racism or availability of fresh food or insecurity of food. And then that had the next level up was even chronic health issues that arise from those fundamental issues. And at the top was the mental health that encompassed everything from violence and trauma from violence to mental health issues from all the other factors. So we kind of were able to understand this. And what we did was we used this information to create our second round of town halls. And what we have been doing is every town hall we do since the first round, we are inviting a subject matter expert. And why are we doing that? Because what we heard from the community is that when you come to talk to us, bring us a subject matter expert that knows what's going on, that has some resources about these issues, and we want to hear from them. So what we're doing in this second round is bringing the subject matter experts to you. And today we're going to talk about violence prevention with Dr. Chuka Emuzwe. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Chuka Emuzwe as the assistant professor at College of Nursing at Rush. And he has been leading and directing the Emerge Innovation Lab and also the Brotherly Act project. And I would like him to take over and do his keynote address for us. Thank you, Chuka, for taking time out for us today.
Thank you so much, Santosh. And hey, everyone. It's the end of the day, so thank you for being here. 6 o'clock hits quite different now that the weather is starting to get warm. It used to get really dark around this time. So I will share my screen really quickly. Santosh, could you give me sharing privileges, please?
Yes.
I want. Oh, okay.
You should be able to do it. You are a co-host now.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
Perfect. We can see your screen.
Awesome. Okay, so I have about 15 minutes to go through some of the slides I have. And overall today, I will be pushing out a charge, a call to action, basically. This is the town hall. It's a conversation. I'm not going to preach at you with my research, none of that stuff. But I'm going to try to provoke the way we think about violence prevention for young Black boys and men specifically. And so just so we're on the same page, I wanted to start with a definition of pediatric and youth violence. And so this involves physical, emotional, psychological harm or aggression that involves children and adolescents. And so think about everything from bullying, child abuse, domestic violence, or in this case, dating violence for this age, gang-related violence, gun violence, school violence, and so on. In fact, youth violence is a big catch-all, if you will, for different forms of violence that affects our children, our nephews, our sons, so on and so forth. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. If you look at some of the charts that we have, I'm not going to dwell on this chart. This is not news. I look around the room and we all know about the violence, not just in Chicago. We're talking Oakland, California. We're talking about Detroit. We're talking about Michigan. We're talking about St. Louis, Missouri. All of these hotspots across the country. And when you see firearm-related deaths in particular, you realize that there was an uptick in 2019, especially during the pandemic. Overall, while different forms of violence are trending downwards, firearm violence and firearm deaths is trending upwards. If you look at the chart on the right, it breaks it down by gender. Males are leading the charge. Since 2018, there's been a steady uprise and uptick in firearm deaths of children and adolescents. Firearm homicide is the third leading cause of death for all youth, aged 10 to 24. and the US youth far outpace other youth across the world in different countries. When we look at this by race and ethnicity, forget about the text, just look at the chart. What stands out to you? Are we surprised by how high those bar charts are for Black children and adolescents in terms of their firearm deaths and rates? This is data from 2022. This is as recent as it gets. An uptick. Young Black boys are they have a 6 times higher firearm death rate than any other racial group in the country. They're breaking records for all the wrong reasons. When we look at young Black men, 15 to 34, about 36% of that group were the representative sample for Black men amongst gun homicides in 2021. In short, young Black boys are 24 times more likely to die from firearm homicides than any other group. And so there are several effects of violence. I'm not going to dwell on some of this. These are my problem slides. I start out with the problem slides and then we end with some of the solution slides. But in terms of thinking about the effects of violence, I want us to expand our thinking and how we think about it, because there are different effects and consequences. Anything from mental health problems, depression, PTSD, suicide. Are we talking about injuries, head trauma, fractures, burns? Are we talking about communicable diseases like STDs, unsafe sexual practices, HIV, or maternal and child health issues? And what about the non-communicable diseases that we don't talk about a lot, like diabetes, and how violence can put a switch on in a young man's head and is exposed to stress for years and years on end, and he starts to incorporate risky behaviors, and the cortisol hormones in his body stay ever present in his bloodstream. And over time, that accumulation of stress can lead to insulin resistance, which can lead to type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular issues. Or we're talking about the cost of violence in terms of youth violence for the country. Another less talked about dimension is the long arm of trauma. About 1 in 2 young Black boys who survive a penetrative injury will return to the hospital for a similar injury within 5 years. I say that again, 1 in 2 who survive an injury will come back to the hospital in 5 years for a similar injury. And about 20% of that group will not survive the 5 years. And when we talk about youth mental health, it is such a broad topic. We've had these conversations on and on about youth mental health. We have parents calling the lab and asking us to help their kids or help their sons, especially during the summer. Summer months are rolling in right now. But when we talk about youth mental health, I want us to think specifically about exactly what we're trying to resolve right here. Are we talking about the emotional, psychological, or social well-being of young Black boys? How they think, how they feel, how they behave? Are we trying to push some tools we know work, like resilience, an overplayed word in the field of youth violence prevention? We put the burden of resolving violence on the shoulders of these young boys. Or we're talking about emotional regulation, healthy coping. And then we'll talk about manifestations of mental health diseases and illnesses. Are we specifically looking at depression, anxiety, suicide, self-care issues, social comparison, substance dependence? Are we looking at firearm violence and its effect on trauma and chronic stress for these young boys? And there are a lot of text on this slide. I'm not going to dwell on the slide, but I wanted to draw attention to what are dimensions of the conversation about youth mental health. Suicide is a 3rd leading cause of death for African Americans aged 15 to 24. And this data was from 2020. But men, Black men specifically, are 4 times more likely to die by suicide compared to Black women. However, Black young girls and females in grades 9 to 12 are 60% more likely to attempt suicide, or were 60% more likely to attempt suicide in 2019 compared to other females. Black people in the community have high rates of PTSD. Surprise, surprise, this is not news. We know this. We've been talking about this for decades now. Also, Black Americans are least likely to utilize mental health care services. That is not news, and we know why. We've been having conversations about that. Another dimension that we don't talk about a lot is the transfer of intergenerational trauma. Science and research shows that we transfer this trauma in our genes to our children intact for generations on and on. We also transfer this trauma and stories to our children and in the experiences that these young children go through in our communities as well. There are several barriers that these young people face when it comes to mental health, barriers that even we ourselves face: structural and systemic racism. All of the accumulation of different forms of racism, microaggressions, biases, and trauma, all of that equates to what we describe as racial trauma. Or we're talking about mental health stigma that some of these young men face. For some Black men, you're soft if you seek help for mental health, or if you even talk about it. Although some of that is changing with our younger Black boys, the Gen Z generation. They're becoming more receptive to support. But then the mistrust of healthcare systems still exists. There's a mistrust of legal and so-called justice systems. There's also the mistrust of academic systems, mistrust of researchers like me, because we've been going to the communities and collecting this data for decades now, and not much is changing. And the flip side of that conversation is a researcher is a researcher is a researcher, and there's only so much a researcher can do. This changes at policy level, governmental level changes that we need to tackle as a community. Are we talking about the 2% of psychiatrists and 4% of psychologists in the US who are Black? 2% of psychiatrists and 4% of psychologists. Some of these numbers are so small, they might as well fall within the margin of error. In terms of mental and behavioral health use, the numbers speak for themselves. I'm looking specifically at Black youth or Black people in general. This is irrespective of age. 8.9% compared to white groups, 18.3%, two or more races, 17.6%, so on and so forth. And so in addressing the title of my presentation, I was not trying to be sensationalizing. I did not want to sensationalize this topic. We often have to approach this conversation thinking about the multiple identities that these young boys occupy as victim, offender, and witness to violence. A sample of 300 young Black boys in Chicago that we interviewed, about 73% of them said they've been impacted by secondhand violence. They've seen someone get shot, beaten up, stabbed, so on and so forth in their community. There's also homicide survivorship, but we don't talk about that enough. Young boys 18 to 24 experienced approximately 3 homicide deaths of loved ones in their lifespan. And all of this, there is a baggage of trauma that these youth take individually and collectively along their lifespan. And so looking at research, more recent data, we did a survey data with about 300 young Black boys in Chicago, age 15 to 24. Most of them were around age 18. Most of them had some high school or high school diploma. Most of them identified as students. I do apologize for moving quickly with the slides, but I want to get to the good part. But with this population, about 1 in 2 said they've been impacted by violence. Think of impacted by violence as very different from witnessing the violence. With witnessing the violence, you're removed from it. You can see it, you can hear it, you can smell it, but you're not quite the victim right there. But being impacted by violence are victimized in some way. We looked at physical fighting. About 75% of them said they had been in a physical fight at least once in the past year. We also looked at their dating and relationship violence in Chicago here. Most of them, 1 in 3, reported perpetrating partner violence against a dating partner. Psychological abuse was highest, about 40%, and then there was physical abuse. We also wanted to understand gun carrying and weapon carrying behaviors in this population. So we asked about 30-day weapon carrying, and about 20% of them said they carried a weapon or gun 2 to 3 times in the past month. This is 6 times higher than the national average. About the same number, 20% said they'd been threatened with a weapon in the past year. I'm going to move on quickly. Don't worry about everything going on, but focus on the block of text in the bottom right. About 20%, 1 in 5 reported binge drinking, which we define as more than 5 drinks in one go. There's a very big overlap between substance use and violence. Those two things do not always lead to each other, but oftentimes there's an overlap between co-occurring violence and co-occurring substance use. About 700,000 urban youths go to emergency departments annually for violence-related offenses that include substance use. And about 20% of that group used the substance in the 3 hours preceding the injury that brought them to the hospital. So very big overlap there. We took it a step further, not to just talk about the numbers, but we wanted to understand the stories, the experiences of these young boys. And so we interviewed about 16 of them and 7 service providers, adult service providers in Chicago. Some of the themes that you see on the slide are not new, but something stood out. A history of violence, ongoing revolving doors of violence was something these young men talked about over and over again. It's hard to hear a young man say he can count more friends that died than fingers on his hands. It's hard to hear a young man say he doesn't think he might live past 24. It's so normalized, it's part of the life now. When we ask them about programs in Chicago, by the way, anywhere you look in Chicago, there's a program. There's a conundrum between this abundance of program on the one end and this abundance of a burden of violence. There's a disconnect. What is going on in between that? What is preventing these young men from using the services that exist? They talked about service avoidance. They don't want to be part of the system. If organizations, establishments have police presence, the likelihood that young Black boys will show up there is very low. They talked about emotional avoidance and coping. Everything from coping using pornography, coping using substances, coping using retaliation, coping using online bullying or online cyber banging. All of those things, these young men were telling us about how they use those different risky behaviors to cope. Of course, they did tell us about some positive behaviors that they use, and I can talk about those. But if I move on from this slide, many of them have asked us for what they call felon-friendly services. Many of them have a case, they've caught a case in their life, and they cannot get past it. It's the glass ceiling on their lives, and they need resources that take that into consideration. The CDC put out this playbook in 2016 for programs that they found are effective in reducing violence. I wanted to put this up. It's very important because many of the violence prevention programs that we respect and that have shown meaningful results use strategies from this playbook. Everything from family, promoting the family environment and supporting healthy development in the family, early child interventions, or providing quality education in early life, strengthening youth skills, connecting youth to caring adult mentoring programs are one of the programs we know do a really good job and work. Santosh, I think someone is in the lobby, just FYI. Anyways, creating protective community environment, so environmental, physical interventions, intervening to lessen harms and to prevent future risk. So taking this playbook, a lot of programs, like I say, are using at least one of the roles, one of the strategies there to address youth violence. And at Rush University, at my lab, this is one of the things we do too, talking about solutions. During the pandemic, I was part of violence prevention programs that had to switch online because, of course, we were social distancing at the time. There are pros and cons to using technology, and I'll talk about some of those shortly. But we developed a digital tool called the Brotherly Act app. We're still developing it. We're still testing it with these young men. They're giving us their feedback on what they want to be on this intervention. But in short, it's a brief intervention. It can be accessed on the phone or on a PC. It is based on the acceptance and commitment therapy. That's the ACT in the name, acceptance and commitment therapy, which provides an opportunity for healing, empowerment, and positive change among these young boys. It's a take-home intervention, an intervention they can access on their couch, on the bus, wherever they are. It's useful, we think, for those who have never been in the system, all the way to those who have already been in the system. So the treatment curious to the treatment veterans. It's culture informed. So this intervention, as it is, was designed specifically for and by young Black boys. And there are several components to the intervention. I'm happy to talk about it if anybody's interested, but I wanted to go through this quickly. We have video-based life skills on the intervention. So everything from gang resistance, drug refusal, coping skills, non-conflict, conflict resolution, dating violence, and the likes. And the young men have told us they don't want this intervention to remind them of school. And so we've been struggling with how to package this for them. We've settled on a video, but even then they've told us we can do better. We also have a different component. I'm looking at the green box at the bottom, what we call psychological safety planning tools for goal setting, mood tracking, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and risk assessment. And then the final component of the app, after taking all of this knowledge and testing out these tools, a young man can assess his risk for gun violence, and it will produce a score based on certain data points, like his age, his race, and his zip code. And then his past experiences with violence too. And the final component, the green circle, is a chatbot, because some of the young men wanted to connect to real people. They wanted an intervention they can come back to over time. And so we included Devon, the chatbot. And basically Devon can have a conversation with the young men and answer questions around violence prevention and substance use. It's filtered to not give them negative or fake responses. It's doing this under what we call talk therapy. And then finally, a young man can put his zip code and the app can connect him to resources for a particular need, say depression or mental health. And these resources are within a 50-mile radius of Chicago. These are some screenshots of the app. I've talked about the modules. The green bar is the mood tracker. It shows you your mood over time across 30 days. The middle bar, the middle column looks at risk assessment, and then the 80% is a sample of what the risk assessment score will populate. And then there's a narrative that comes for why your risk was so high. And then the final bar is looking at how you can use zip codes to connect them to different resources. But I also wanted to challenge us. I know we're going to talk about research today and how researchers can, as part of the conversation, how research can help move this agenda forward. But I wanted us to also think outside the box. Some of the things we've done to think outside the box have been organizing youth advisory internships at Rush, where young people come for 3 months to tell us what they need, what the problems are. They look at the research we're doing and they help fix things. They get paid to do that too, I should add. We've organized a boot camp focused on leadership, entrepreneurship, and technology skills, telling some of these young boys how they can get jobs in healthcare, so on and so forth. And we have a planned essay writing contest for this summer. There are different ways we're engaging the young men and the different strategies we're using. I'm sure the slides will be available at the end of the presentation, so I'm not going to dwell on them too much. These are some of the faces to these young men. Sometimes it's easy to talk about youth violence from a distance and forget that we're talking about real people, real boys with dreams and hopes. We've worked with high school kids and, out of high school populations and out of school populations. All of them have contributed in some way to developing what we call the Broadly Act app now. It's an ongoing process and we're still testing. I wanted to put up this slide to connect to resources, some of the resources in terms of mental health. The green QR code, the first QR code, will take you to a list that I have populated specifically for young adolescents, resources for youth. And then the purple QR code will take you to the SAMHSA website, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services website. It has a list of resources specifically for African Americans who need mental health resources and support, including subsidized services, as well as a referral helpline. It takes a village to get to where we are right now. We have several community partners. But I wanted to challenge us to think, when we deliberate today and when we break out and have these conversations, to think clearly as to what specifically we mean when we're talking about youth violence, what specifically we mean when we're talking about mental health, and how we can target those things meaningfully. Thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Chuka, for this presentation. The data that you showed is extremely, eye-opening, jaw-dropping. I would like to open this time up for us to have some discussion, and I would like to start with our community partners. Tina from Phalanx. Would you be able to come off mute and say a couple of words, share maybe some thoughts around the presentation and the work that Phalanx is doing?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry, I'm on my phone. I'm was on my way home when I so can you everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have, I was listening to the presentation and oh my God, such, great information. I'm so sorry. We have a mental health specialist, and I'm so sorry he was not able to be on this Zoom. Is there a deck for all this information? I would love to be able to share it.
Yes, we'll be sharing the deck with everyone.
Okay, and let me just say I am so excited to be a part of this initiative. We have a violence prevention program here, and some of the information that I heard, I can't wait to share with some of my staff. We're in probably our second year of the violence prevention program. So some of the information that I've heard, it was so helpful to me. And the stats just impactful. I'm in awe of, listening to what's going on in our community. Oh, this information it has to get out. I have to do whatever I can to make sure I share this information. And I'm very excited to be a part of this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina. We appreciate you for partnering with us for this town hall. Corey Collins from District Outreach Initiative, are you on? I'd love to have you. Okay.
Yes, I'm
Hi,
on. Good.
Corey.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And I want to first thank you for the opportunity to join you. I was thoroughly impressed with the information I heard. A lot of it kind of hit home because these are things we know, right? But it's not things that we practice and make intentional about wanting to support. The work that I've been doing has been over the years working directly with parents, which I'm continuing to do that, my work with parents. But over the last year, I have intentionally been wanting to do work around violence. In particular, because I have been seeing the incidents of violence at schools, not only amongst students, but also adults. Adults, violent acts being seen and demonstrated with adults, but also adults and children fighting. And so my thought was, how can a child regulate their own emotions if they see adults act in such manners? And so what I did last year was write a grant to do my work to help parents to understand the impact that violence and harm has on their own children, the trauma that it causes. And so what my agency is working to do is to help parents, one, be able to identify what it looks like, and then hopefully be able to help them come up with strategies to work, to remedy, being able to recognize what some of those risk factors and things of that nature are. So I am bringing people from the community to work alongside me that are interested, one, in working directly with parents to help them navigate the influence of these negative behaviors so that they are not demonstrating them in front of their children. And if they see their children demonstrating such behaviors, that they have tools in their own backpack that they can help to remedy and support their children to not be involved in so many of those acts as well. So I would be thoroughly interested in partnering in whatever way I can to support this initiative. We are hoping to put ourselves in a position to work closely with the schools so that we can work with administrators and buildings and teachers so that they can help us to identify those students that they have concern with that are exhibiting these violent acts and behaviors that can be supported by external partners. And then secondly, being able to support parents and what they feel their biggest challenges are in working with their children so that if law enforcement even happens to be involved, maybe we can be the bridge between both of those entities, schools, so that our children are not being expelled, and law enforcement so that our children are not being part of the judicial system. So in whatever way we can pull our resources with this initiative to help support our communities, our children, but also our adults, I want to make a very big notice about that we've got to work alongside the adult just as equally as we are doing our youth at this point. And I want to thank you for the information that I heard, but it also needs to be drilled down to the parent level so that they are fully aware of these incidents and these statistics. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you, Dory.
much.
Go ahead, Chuka. You want to respond, please?
I was just gonna say I completely agree. The parents play a big role. I think sometimes we push a lot of that responsibility on the school teachers, and God bless school teachers because they're doing a lot right now. They're going through a lot right now.
Yes.
And then, of course, the parents do need, the skills. Sometimes, like, if you click the slide we're looking at right now, if you click the National Alliance of Mental Illness, it will take you to a page with a lot of information. That's it right there. It will take you to a page that's overwhelming. These are wonderful, wonderful resources. If you're looking at this on your phone, which most people are doing, it just becomes overwhelming and intimidating. We got to figure out a way to communicate the presence of resources appropriately to the parents because these resources exist. They're there. Like I said, a lot of programs right here in Chicago, but there's no uptake. I don't know what that solution would look like, especially for the parents, and how we can sort of tailor this information, make it specific. Sometimes when we talk about youth violence, there are different types. And some of these types do not affect the young boys in our lives right now, or the young girls in our lives right now who are Black or Hispanic or white, because they're experiencing different forms of violence. We're talking about self-harm and self-cutting and suicidal ideations. You're looking at white girls and white boys for the most part. But we need to be specific as to what type of resources are tailored to what types of issues. But anyways, I completely agree, Dory. And I also wanted to shout out Ms. Saunders too as well. I cannot see your email addresses because I was going to reach out just to say hi. But if you do have it, please put it in the chat.
Robert M. Douglas Sr., you've had a couple of things to share in the chat, and if you would like to come on mute or come off of mute, I would love to welcome you to the floor to share some of your thoughts.
I'm excited for the muse to change, right? So that research can really affect some change. I'm excited that we on the ground floor of creating best practice. It is the transparency within the hegemonic population that we are waiting to see diversity and inclusion. Some communities of color are ready for the battle of gun violence research, and it affects its cognitive effects. I was reading some literature this morning about environment, the role of environment in gun violence. And so I can't wait to heal and to allow some of my young people to see what Black men look like that's healed from gun violence. And we're gonna have some fun with it in Roseland because we have a hospital, a new medical district. So I'm excited. But gun violence research. So So the ban on gun violence research and its effect, I would like to know Rush's position on that and its lifting of the ban and how we can position ourselves with the new federal office of firearm violence and prevention. So with all that being said, just where do we as communities play a role in the transformation?
Thanks a lot, Robert.
Yep.
I often say I speak for myself. I'm not speaking for Rush University. But of course, Rush University is my employer. And this kind of programs targeting youth violence Rush has been doing amazing work for a long time. But with respect to, I forgot the last thing you said, I was going to respond to that. But with respect to the lifting of the gun violence ban, we're finding that a lot of funders, big funders like the federal government, are pushing a lot of money right now into gun violence research. Organizations that weren't funding, weren't applying for gun violence research are now able to do that. But the problem is these community organizations are coming into this conversation without appropriate data tracking and measurements of what they've done and how they've done it. And so most times you find that if you follow the money, it goes to hardcore interventions like policing and hotspot policing and, the shot spotter technology, whatever it's called right now, and those kind of so-called interventions.
And hospitals.
Yeah.
Oh no, and hospitals.
And we have to figure out a way to bring us, the community, to this conversation. And we need to come armed. We need to come prepared.
Yeah, we're ready. We're ready.
We do have a comment in the chat, and it's from Pat Day McRae, and Pat says, "Sorry, I can't go live. I'm driving. As a grief coach, I work primarily with mothers to support them with their grief, preventative measures, and violence prevention. I'd love to collaborate with any and all of you to support this cause." And she gives the email ID, info@pdmjourneycoaching.com. Thank you so much, Pat.
Thanks.
Anybody else have any other comment or observation or remark you want to make?
Santos, thank you for helping to put this together. Shuka, I just want to thank you for the information that you shared. As I listened, I heard the breakdown of family as a major factor that that has directly been affected by culture. And so our present culture has broken the family down because what the responses that I heard, was that people don't know how to connect with people anymore. Whether you be a program or not, those resources are fine. But if you said something that's real important, they don't want them. They don't want to get close to them because they don't trust them, because they've lived a life of not trust, and violence have built that in their life. And so it's a real big problem. And I would love to hear about more research in how do we connect people back to their families and heal from that place. But it's a big problem. I'm glad there's a lot of interest in it, not for necessarily finance, but there has to be some interest in it for our civilization to thrive again. Because many people on here have lived a life where it wasn't violent all the time, and we knew how to work with each other. And even if we fought as little kids, we were friends the next day. So we do have a reference point that we have to try to resemble moving forward. But thanks again.
Thanks a lot, Pastor Epton. You definitely hit the nail on the head. Not to blame families and the family dysfunction that's going on in our community, But of course, we cannot have a conversation about violence prevention without talking about the families. Recently, the young man who killed how many people, his parents got a prison time. And you can see that the conversation is starting to shift, not just from the youth themselves, but to the parents and families and what we're doing. But you make a very good point. As we're addressing this with the youth, we should also be addressing it with the families, with the fathers who are modeling non-violent behaviors for their children. We have a new program we recently we're thinking about it, we're talking to people about it, but I've realized that there are not enough interventions for the men who use violence. I think society sort of pushes them to the corner, and so they get punishment, incarceration, monitoring, those kind of things. But we need to figure out a way to help these men rehabilitate, help these fathers be better fathers and be better dads to their children. There is conversation about father-child interventions. There are different issues with that. For example, if you're talking about a father who has used violence in the home, how can we trust him in that kind of space to manage his emotions? So there's a lot of healing that we need to do with different members of the family. The moms, most times are victims in this case. What kind of interventions are we giving the mothers? Black mothers especially are more likely to die from domestic violence incidents, what we call femicide. And this gets worse when they get pregnant, go figure. And so thinking about all of these different dimensions with the family, we have a lot of work to do.
Thank you. And on that note, there is a comment from Janisha Harris in the chat about SGA Youth and Family Services, Rosalind and SCAN coordinator. She talks about, can't chime in, but thanks so much for sharing such empowering information. Thank you, Janisha, for chiming in on the chat. Thank you. This has been interesting, right? We're talking about violence and we cannot stay away from how the family plays a role, or the role of fathers. Anybody wants to remark on the community level? Because I was thinking individual, the family, and then the community level interventions, right? So any thoughts like that along those lines?
If I can, I'd like to say something. And Shuka, you actually touched on this a bit. And with the work that we've been doing in the Austin community and the conversations that we've been having, I've been noticing that this is something that comes out a lot, is community members are feeling that the solution to curbing violence is by creating another program. But there are tons of, I mean, as you mentioned, lots of communities, there are tons of programs, lots of services that are out there that are very concentrated in these communities. I don't understand where the gap is, but can you think of perhaps some other ways at tackling the issue other than just developing a new program? Because that seems to be the idea that is the answer.
The different things I can think of, including conversations I've had with service providers, and anything from, we're designing interventions that do not fit the real life experiences of this youth. They sound good in theory, they sound good in a lab, but they don't sound useful in real life. We also have some of the young men, they've told myself and my team not to design interventions that remind them of school. And so we've struggled with thinking about creative ways. In fact, when I talked about the videos we had on our app, we tested it with some of them. Were like, hey, what do you think about this video? We started with cartoonish videos. They said no. They wanted videos that had real Black men and real people. So we did that too. But we've done that now. And a chunk of 5 minutes, we have about 7 of those videos covering different topics, but each one is approximately 5 minutes. That is a lot of time. That's 45 minutes put together for this young man. And so they want us to break it down into small bite sizes like you would find on TikTok. It sounds interesting to some of us, but this is what they're asking for. And this is how they want to consume that information. We also need to figure out how not to preach at these young men in these programs. because they tell us they already know the violence is bad. They already know the substance use is bad. What next? Some of them need money in their pockets and food in their bellies to buy milk and diapers for their babies. And so thinking about how programs can go from moralizing the conversation around violence to giving these young men real life gainful employment. We have some colleagues in different universities here in Chicago, I think U Chicago, where they combine CBT, so talking about thinking and how the young men think, and they merge that with job training. They also merge that with cash transfers, where some young men get a particular amount of money for completing programs and all those things. And they found that those models also work. So basically, we need to rethink the group session thing is wonderful. There's a place for group sessions, but we need to figure out in their homes, in their individual life, what's going on and how can we address this? And then how we define youth violence. Youth violence is such a broad thing. It covers a lot. But how do we design programs that are useful? I've talked about mentoring programs. If you don't take anything away from this conversation today, just know that mentoring programs are one of the strategies we know work right now. Pairing a young man with a positive, warm, caring adult, that works. How can we scale up those type of things? There are different ways to improve on the services we have. A boring part of this work is measuring the success of what we've done, because that is how you get funding to do bigger projects and upscale projects that work. But how we collect that data is the marriage between community partners and researchers. We need to figure out how we can respectfully come together to figure out what works. We don't know exactly what works for many of the programs that are out there right now. Like if you drill down to the brass tacks, what exactly is changing behavior for young men going through this program or young women? It's a very nuanced conversation, but that's my spiel.
That's awesome. Dr. Miller, you want to chime in on the cognitive behavioral therapy?
Thank you. Yes, I'm sorry, but my camera is not working. I'm Dr. Dorian Miller. I'm a faculty member and a physician at the University of Chicago. And one of the comments that Chuka made, which Chuka, thank you so much. Your presentation was just outstanding. Is a kind of therapy that is more of a problem-solving therapy that young men participate in. So sometimes people think about talking to a psychiatrist or psychologist in the way that you see models on TV in which somebody is laying on a couch somewhere and the therapist is behind them and asking them about their childhood or their infancy. Whereas the cognitive behavioral therapy is really focused on how do you behave in the here and now? How do you behave when certain situations arise? How do you become more in touch with what you're feeling? And if those feelings may lead to something that might be an episode of unintended violence towards someone else, how do you manage those thoughts and emotions and feelings? And so it's oftentimes the emotion that leads to the thought that can lead to the action. And so that's what cognitive behavioral therapy works on. If I could just take a moment, Santosh, to make another comment.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I'm hearing in this conversation is that a lot of people are very interested in engaging and perhaps pushing this agenda forward in terms of this work. And so I would strongly encourage you that if you're interested in doing so, please drop your contact information into the chat. Chuka will also put his email in there so that there can be connections that are made after this session is over, because this is one of the things. Thank you, Chuka, for putting that slide back up, because this is something that we had hoped to come out of these town halls is seeing if there are ways in which we can engage people in the community who are dedicated to doing this work, to combining their efforts with people at universities like Rush or University of Chicago to help to provide more solutions for community.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miller. And it was a beautiful way to explain CBT. I think I try to concretize it for parents when they ask exactly what it is. But for some of us who suddenly need a concrete example, I've seen young men go to prison because they felt, in quote, disrespected. And then they did something because someone looked at them funny or said something funny. Or they took on retaliation for an issue that happened to somebody else. And oftentimes we need to tell these young people that the fact that you think it doesn't mean you are it. Like your thoughts and your behavior are two separate things. You remember when you were teenagers, it was so hard back then to separate those two things. And then as we get older, we start to figure it out. As we get older, we now have something to lose. But for many of these youth, their thoughts and their automatic actions are one and the same thing, but we got to teach them how to separate that. And CBT helps do that, help them separate their thinking from their behavior. Thank you
Chuka.
so
Thank
much
you,
for your
Dr. Miller.
contact.
Also, there was a comment from Mr. Douglas Sr. about metacognitive development therapy. Could you chime in on that, Robert? I'm not sure if you heard me.
No, I heard you.
There you go.
So you know, that's a metacognition is a comprehensive reading educational tool, right? That we use. But if we could think about it like Michael Jordan thought about it, seeing itself in a better position to be great. I'm sorry to hear that. Our children can have a better outcome if they prepare about what they're thinking about and having the proper tools around them to be successful in that process. I'm not a physician. I'm just a person that's suffering from gun violence. And to find out that Congress banned it from you, researchers finding out the cognitive effect, it really was an insult and racist because it was a concentrated group of people that it was done to. So I'm not a doctor. I am someone that is adamant about providing what kind of work as a practice for myself and what I'm introducing into my work as a practitioner in social science. So if I didn't touch it the way you or one of the other physicians would have touched it, I can't wait to see your PowerPoint presentation so that we can add to some of the trainings that outreach workers, our parent volunteers are getting so that they can be very well equipped in identifying some of these stresses and trauma. I don't know. It's just a thought. But like I said, we stay ready. We're ready for this opportunity to defend our children.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for jumping in. Karen, you had a comment.
Yes, thank you, Santosh, and thank you, Chika, for this wonderful presentation. I thought it was really great and really important for what we're seeing, especially on the south and west sides of the city. I noticed that you talked a lot about mental health, and you just raised a comment about, you know, a lot of our youth are going to jail over, you know, the concept of being disrespected and all of these issues that are rising. And I work in the mental health space. I'm a peer. And one of the things I wanted to kind of chime in about is, especially with the programming, is one of the things that I've seen that has been useful is the use of alternative dispute resolution areas, such as peace circles and things of that nature. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that type of programming, especially with regards to perhaps youth who were already involved with the criminal justice system and or who have had any kind of interaction with the juvenile justice system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. So I have heard of the peace circles. It's something that we use a lot, in the field or the world of domestic violence, for certain populations, especially Native Americans. We have restorative practices that sort of almost model the peace circles. But we, youth violence, we don't necessarily use peace circle. I mean, we have practitioners that are actually using those modalities. We have a larger scale structure where we do what we call violence interruption with street outreach workers. And oftentimes when the street outreach workers go out there where, a violence is about to happen or just recently happened, they do some in the moment peace circle tactics to mediate and reduce the likelihood that someone is going to go ahead and retaliate. So as described, the concept of peace circles, we don't necessarily call it that, but we already are using it. And outreach violence interruptions, by the way, is another strategy that we know work, but our violence interrupters are doing a lot and exposing themselves to a lot of harm. And we need to think about a way to support them in that space. I've seen a different research team use technology to support violence interrupters. So before they go there, they have information telling them about what's already happening, how dangerous that situation is and those kind of things. I do love the idea of peace circles. I think for Black boys especially, there are specific strategies that we have found work with Black boys that typically do not work with other boys. Storytelling and having these young boys express themselves in that kind of a space is very helpful. Oftentimes it's hard to get them to talk in the beginning for those kind of programs, but when they build trust, it takes a while. But when they build trust, oftentimes just talking about their situation is an intervention in itself. That kind of thing happens in the peace circle. Dr. Stovall?
Hi, not doctor yet. I'm working on it, Pachuca. I'd love to have a conversation with you offline to talk about peer support. That's kind of where I focus in on. I'm almost a master's level social worker, but I think peer support could be a really great avenue to help not only your workers, but also the youth that you work with. So I'd be happy to have that conversation. I'll drop my email in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Stovall looks good or sounds good. So soon I'm already prophesying that into the future for you.
Awesome. And as a good facilitator, I'm going to keep this moving. Any other comment before I move on to the next step? Okay, we have some claps going on. Thank you, Natasha. Okay, quick question. I want to spend like 5 minutes on this. You are all the experts from the communities, and you are seeing this as much as Chuka and other researchers are seeing it. So we wanted to hear from you on two issues, two questions. In your experience, in your community, right? What are the violence prevention issues that are like you are concerned about or that are on top of your mind? Is there any particular issue related to violence prevention that you want to bring to the table that we have not addressed so far? Just making sure that you get a space to speak about this too. Chuka, any issue that didn't come up that you expected to come up and didn't get a chance to talk about?
Not really. I think one thing I also did not add is that there's only so much you can do with an app when it comes to violence prevention. As a digital health researcher who has spent 3 years designing this digital intervention, I know that far too well. In fact, I've been told that an app will not stop bullets, and that is true. But there are groups of young men that can benefit greatly from that kind of programming and that kind of intervention. We've had parents ask for interventions for 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. Parents are asking for this kind of programming for younger and younger kids. And so we need to sort of have the conversation as to how we can augment, when we talk about that bridge between, we have all of these services in Chicago, but we have a high burden of violence and there's a disconnect. We need to figure out how to bridge that disconnect. Technology is just one way of several other ways to bridge that gap. We need to think about how we can turn the way we use technology for good. The shot spotter thing, it does its thing. I think in terms of technology, we've become very sophisticated in surveilling, monitoring, and controlling young men, especially when they come out of incarceration. we're advancing in that field. The government is funding a lot of those kind of tech-based interventions, but technology interventions to support the health and well-being of young boys, young girls, our youth in general, we have to start having the conversation. They're already hanging out on their phone anyways. They're spending hours and hours on the phone. How can we reasonably, without increasing burden on them, but how can we reasonably deliver interventions and therapeutic resources that these young boys and girls will not typically find access to? But how can we get that to them where they are? But that's something I wanted to add, is there are downsides. Technology is not the end all be all. There are downsides, and it's just augmenting what we already have, not replacing what we're doing right now in the community.
Okay. And you know, my background is in technology, so I always feel like apps won't stop the bullets, but if they succeed in stopping even one bullet, that makes the app and the effort worth it, I guess. The other question I had was like, in order to think through like what kind of research or what kind of issues researchers should address in your neighborhood and community, is there any suggestion for other researchers like Chuka to focus on about violence prevention in your community? Any thoughts or comments or remarks?
So I'm reading this book called The Body Keeps the Score. And it talks about the Vietnam vets being in studies that looked at their brain plasticity and the connectivity and this, as the diagnosis of PTSD back in after the Vietnam War. I think because of the engrossed leadership within Congress, especially Black Congress, for banning researchers from studying the effects other than in Vietnam vets. I think if we get back to some of those techniques that was covered that's being covered in the book, on an urban level, we would see how to address it from a empirical way. Like you're saying, you want community engagement. However, to do that, we will have to look at the studies from a more in-depth way at this point because of the trust issue. And so I think getting back to that, and if you know the book, you know what I mean, what I'm talking about. But that book, it's definitely where I'm starting.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas. I tried to capture what you said in the chat. So if anybody wants to add more thoughts to that, welcome. So you're saying like there needs to be much more like fundamental empirical research into even like the physical brains of the people. Okay.
Yeah, because as I have a brain replica that I showed to the children, and I showed them their amygdala, right? And I showed them that is the only place of the brain that detects danger, and it can send a false alarm if you're not careful. You know what I mean? And if you don't know better, and you don't have those, when you talk about self-regulation, what does that really mean, right? In that trauma-informed care, it's incredible, and that's why I said the trainer model for practitioners is very important in this field of work as well. But I have a lot. I've been working on this quite a long time, and so I have a lot of ideas and publishing more empirical information. Yeah. But
I see. Thank you so much.
You can find it. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you for your comment. Ellen, please jump in.
Coming from social services and professional mental health counseling, Your environment and community has a huge impact on you, what you're exposed to, and just the feeling of coming back into our communities, and they're not beautiful, they're not rehab like other communities are, and yet it's our tax dollars. So we have neighborhoods instead of communities. And I think that there needs to be a concerted effort to rebuild our communities where our children feel safe and that they understand the value and respect of you belong to us, and we show you by the type how we take care of our communities. And also, it is just evident that we're being over policed, but in our communities, they're running stop signs and the stuff that they could intervene so that seniors will feel more safe and not traumatized driving. Those simple little things are not being addressed by the police, but then the negative impact is huge on our young people. And so how do we, when you talk about filling the gap, I come from social services. And we have all these programs, but most of the programs you expect the people to figure out you have them instead of pushing them and taking them to them. So therefore, over 30 years, majority of our population haven't changed. And I ran a summer program, and I taught the children landscaping. And one guy was definitely in a gang and had definitely committed violence. And just the fact of him washing down a sidewalk, cool water, and a way to think and calm himself had more impact on him than just talking at him. And also being in the presence of an adult that set standards for him, but honored and respect him. So it's you got to have that real interaction, but it takes time to build trust with young people. So you, like Dr. Chuka said, you got to set an environment that they feel good interacting with you, but they are hungry for adult engagement, and they are hungry for you setting standards and not letting them just come and do anything, but helping them to choose better for themselves. But the missing link has always been the parent. So that's my take on it.
Thank you so much. That's totally agree with you that that's area that needs to be. It goes back to Chuka's point of uptake of existing programs and the importance of family connections. Thank you so much. Dr. Dugan, you want to jump in?
You're muted, Dr. Dugan.
It's been an incredible hour, and Dr. Chuka, really wonderful presentation. Wondering in your qualitative work, thinking about intergenerational trauma, like the physical, impact, which we know about with telomeres and the DNA. But what about what Ellen was just saying too about what are the conversations and how is there, given the history of our country, how is the conversation both real but also has some positivity or sort of a forward moving piece to it? Did that come up at all when you were doing your qualitative research with your smaller groups? Just curious.
Thank you, Dr. Dugan. That's the way forward. Like I said, they tell us they know the violence is bad and the substance use is bad. They're looking for the what next. And so when we're asking some of the young men, some of the strategies and things they're already engaging in, many of them are seeking support from their friends. They're more likely to talk about an issue with a friend than they are with a parent. So do with that what you will. Several of them, when we explicitly ask them about things like mindfulness. I think when we talk about mindfulness, the yoga variant of mindfulness, I'm just going to say it like that, that's not something that appeals to them. That's not something they care about. Young boys are mindful when they're listening to their favorite music or favorite artist, in their headphones in the dark in their room. Young boys are mindful when they're relaxing and playing games or shooting hoops or playing basketball with their friends, if they have a neighborhood that's safe enough to do that. Some of them, we cannot tell them about taking a walk where there are no side routes to walk, or where the side roads are really hot in the afternoon and early evenings and those kind of things. So they're telling us some of the things they're doing, talking to friends. They're looking at online resources. Some of them download apps. There's an app called Motivation. I think we're speaking to about 32 young boys in a high school on the west side, and that particular app came up a lot of times. So basically what the app does, it sends them positive messages and quotes, at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day. I, as a young man, wouldn't have responded to that kind of an intervention, but apparently our Gen Z youth are responding to that kind of intervention. So we need to catch up with them. What else? We asked about religion and church. Some of them are very grounded in their religion and they're grounded in spirituality. For some of them, I think maybe outside of organized religion, they have conversations about higher being. So that helps them cope. But then again, I'm asking a group of 15, 16, 17-year-olds about the violence in the community that they have no control about. And I get wary in qualitative research, asking them how they're coping, as opposed to us as the adults in the room, as the adults in the community doing something, instead of, talking about resilience and how they can be resilient. I mean, it's important to be resilient. That's the way to survive right now. But what happens 5 years down the road to young boys that are coming behind them? We're going to keep having the conversation about resilience and coping. We need to change the agenda, change the status quo. I don't know if that answered your question. I tend to get on the soapbox
Absolutely.
sometimes.
Yeah, you're listening. I hear it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We had a link for MAFA, so I just put that in. Thank you. Robert, you want to speak more about it? You're on mute.
Well, no, other than I help organize the group. I used to travel out west to help organize that initiative. It's great. And I promise you, it was down the street from Miss Sanders' old shop on Washington. They're doing great things. Your partnership is groundbreaking with them. I can't wait to tell the community what's really at stake here with a partnership with Rush in this moment. So you can speak to it better than I can.
So you're referring to the partnership with Rush for the West Garfield Park Sankofa Wellness Village, right? So Rush will be a partner with MAFA as well as the Sankofa Wellness Village.
That's right. That's right. So I don't know. What's his name? Mr. Pitts. He used to be my mentee with MAFA. He works with you guys real closely. Marquise Pitts. Yeah. He's a great kid that came through the MAFA Redemption Project. That works with you guys pretty closely with those projects.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you for bringing that up. I think I'm going to add that into the resources as well. We're coming up on time, so I'm going to make sure we have enough time for wrapping this up. So thank you so much, everyone, for the great discussion. What we will do next steps is we will corroborate all the resources and make sure that the websites are working, and we will list it out into a one-pager and make sure that everybody who is signed up for today's town hall, they'll all get the resources page. These will be all the resources discussed by Chuka, as well as all the resources that people put into the chat. So we will make sure there is a comprehensive list that will go out. And Dr. Chuka's slides will also be shared, as well as if anybody wants access to this recording, we will make sure you get that. So thank you so much for participating in that. Here is a quick request. As part of this work, we do these town halls, and we want to keep collecting your feedback about how we are doing and how we can improve these town halls. So please, if you have 2 minutes, can you take a quick survey? The link for the survey will be on this in this QR code, as well as Will. Can you put the survey link in the chat if you're still there with us? I think he logged off, so let me see if I can do it.
I can see if I can get the link.
Oh, you're there. Awesome. Thank you, Will.
Need you guys to have a great evening.
And
Y'all enjoy yourself.
You too. Thank you all for coming out.
And any questions, comments, feel free to send it to me. I'll make sure the right people get it, as well as Dr. Chuka. Thank you so much for a great talk and making sure we're all inspired to address this issue head on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we
Any
will.
comments, Christy, to wrap us up for the evening?
Yes, I mean, you basically shared with everyone, but again, I just wanted to say thank you everyone for joining us this evening. This was such a great discussion, and Chuka, the work that you do, I love hearing about it. So I'm really grateful that you agreed to do this. Thank you for everyone who shared in the chat and who shared some ideas and some of the resources. As Santosh mentioned, we will be sending out a resource as a follow-up from today. Also, I did get some people asking if I'll be sending out the recording. I will do my best to do that. It does tend to be a large file, but if I'm able to do it through like Google Drive or something, I'll make sure to send the video out in addition with the copy of the presentation slides and another survey link just in case you all didn't get a chance to complete it. And that will also include our resources in the email as well. So thank you so much. And then I also want to thank our community partners. Thank you to Phalanx Family Services. And then also thank you to District Outreach Initiatives. Dory Collins, thank you. You just shared so much information, especially around parents and involving parents. But thank you everyone for joining this evening, and have a great night.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have
You
a
as
great
well.
evening.